Hi, everyone. Welcome to Jump, Into Growth Jump. We have across Into Growth at 11 Eastern Standard Time every Wednesday. We have content and live streams across the board, and you are entering our live stream called Jump. And what we're going to talk about today is breaking rules. And it's a topic that I suspect many of you are really excited about and also intrigued by and also frustrated by, in that as leaders, we often want to inspire people to break rules. What does that even mean? And do people actually break rules? And when they do, how do they then keep their jobs? And what rules are made to be broken? Are all rules made to be broken? And it's one of those areas that throughout my life, I've been a rule breaker. And I'd love to hear more from you on the panel. We got Kevin, we got Vera, we got Ken here today, and also we're looking forward to questions from you who may be viewing us at home. So I'll start, if you don't mind. One of the best books I've ever read, and I've read it multiple times, and I read it, I think, for the first time over 25 years ago. It's a book called First Break All the Rules. And it was written by a bunch of researchers from the Gallup organization, and I still remember the stories. And oftentimes when people think about breaking rules, they think about things that you don't do, like break the law, do things that are unethical. If your boss has a hot point, you may not want to break, you may want to check with him or her first. But here's an example of breaking the rules. They tell the story in this, many, many stories of these great leaders from all walks, restaurateurs, police officers. And there's a story in this book called First Break All the Rules about this commissioner in some southern town. And the highest paid police officer, who made more than the police chief, was a beat officer. And when asked why this police chief would play this beat officer more than anyone else in the police force, he simply said, "What's our job? Our job is community. Building community, keeping our community safe." Well, Officer Johnson, or whoever the person's name is, he's the best at it. And therefore, he gets paid the most. That's an example of breaking the rules. And there are thousands of examples, hundreds of them in this book. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of our personal experiences here. But if I had a nickel, and I'm going to ask one of you guys, if I had a nickel for every time in my career someone said, "How do you get away with that?" I said, "Well, I don't have to ask for permission to do my job." And I'll tell you some stories and so on and so forth. So over to you, Vera. When you think about what it means to break rules, you've worked all over the world, you grew up in the former Soviet Union. What does it mean to you to break rules, and how do you inspire that in the people that you work with, people that you work for, people who work for you?
Thank you, Brian. Well, look, yesterday when I started reflecting about this topic, I think that the first thought which came to my mind was how, like, the fact of having rules is perceived in different cultural contexts. And now I think that it's a very interesting comment that we just had from Basel that says, depend how credible those rules are. So obviously, I mean, away from the corporate context, for example, the first idea I had, if you travel, if you live in different countries, see how people are driving and respecting traffic rules all over the world. Like, you go to Switzerland, you go to Zurich, and you don't really see a person who's crossing a road with a red light, and then at the same time you go to the south, to South America, to Brazil, and until a certain point there was a rule when actually people were allowed to drive with red lights. I think at a certain point of time at night. So obviously, I think that it's not even about the credibility of rules, but it's about the context where those rules are applied, and also which kind of rules are we talking about, right? Because we have the rules which are imposed by the society, the rules which are not imposed, but the rules which are explained by the tradition, by the religion, business rules, obviously the law itself. So I think that it really, obviously, it's not the best answer, but it depends. And as for myself, I think that I'm either the extreme of being a rule breaker, that is to say, disrupt a rebel, but neither someone who's a conformist, right? Because I think that's like everywhere, neither extreme is good, and it's really the question of balancing. And when it comes to rules, it's really about understanding what is the opportunity cost of breaking this rule, and what's the eventual benefits you can generate with this rule, not necessarily for yourself, but if, for example, again, applied to the organizational context, what's the benefit you're creating for the company by breaking this rule? So basically, like, does it worth it, and how much does it cost in terms of the opportunity cost, not in terms of the material cost?
You made a comment there that I think is intriguing. That is testing the extremes of rules. So over to you, Ken. In terms of testing extremes, so you're a West Pointer, you're a former Special Forces combat officer, and people often perceive the military as a very rules-focused environment. Having been an enlisted soldier myself, I know that it's actually in many ways the opposite. It's a very creative role. So how have you seen other officers, other senior officers, generals, for example, test the extremes of rule breaking and then getting results from that? And how did they do that? How did they even get away with it? What does that even mean?
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind right away off the bat for me is the first is the foundation of trust within the organization. And I think that goes up and down, especially from a senior level, right? You have to have, and then the second piece of it is kind of on the lines of what Vera was just talking about too, is credibility and the individual's credibility within the organization. So I think if you've built the foundation of trust based on, the credibility you've earned over time, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but that foundation of trust that you've built up with your superiors, that they're going to give you that kind of freedom of movement to make those kind of calls, break those rules when you see them. I think it's kind of actually nice in the military too. There's a very black and white, when you talk about kind of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and those things, is actually like, as long like is something on, like, when you're supposed to be following an order within the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is something unethical or illegal. Like, those are like two very clear, distinct things. Now, and so once you have that, you can kind of, take that with you going forward. And usually, like, breaking rules is at times difficult in the military, but you're right, it can be very creative. There can be a lot of autonomy in the military as well too. So I think, like, after you've built up your credibility, you've built up trust within an organization, people will give you a little bit more freedom to make those calls that may be a little bit outside the clear, like, field posts, if you will. I also think, you can't do it on day one necessarily. But I think sometimes, especially within a structured organization like the military, but oftentimes you're being placed in those areas where, like, there's an opportunity to break those rules or have more autonomy. There's a reason you were even placed in that position in the first place. So I think that is significant as well too. And that's the kind of way I think of it. And then as that's going up, you've built up your credibility, you have a foundation of trust within your organization. But then, how do you kind of distill that kind of, entrepreneurial mindset within your organization for your people, your, say, other middle managers or your other leaders that work for you, is giving them the autonomy, giving them the freedom to make decisions, try new things as well too, I think can be really important and empowering as well. And that's kind of how I think of it, is you give your folks the opportunity to have a lot more leeway. You give them, a clear direction that you want them going in, and then get out of their way. Don't tell them how to do it. Let them figure it out. As long as they have those guiding principles, kind of like we talked about extensively last week around values and the values of the organization and the mission statement of the company or the organization as well too. As long as they have that clear guiding light to stay within those boundaries, if you can get out of the way and stop micromanaging your folks, I think people will shock you, and you'll be very surprised of the way that they will get results, the way they'll get to those results. You can't come up with every idea. You're probably often not the smartest person in the room. So getting people that freedom to then make those decisions and solve problems on their own can be empowering. You'll get more motivated workforce, and then you could get results faster as well too.
So let's talk about that in terms of values and missions, the values around breaking the rules. A lot of it is, in some cases, toned from the top. But having said that, I coach, as you know, a lot of people, and sometimes chief commercial officers and other people. And I always say to them, we talk about this issue of breaking rules and the challenges around inspiring people to do so. And I would say, well, you have a CEO. Your CEO's job is to establish the values and strategic direction of the company, and your job is to support that. Everyone goes, yeah, that's fair enough. But what are your values? What do you mean? Have you had a values discussion with your team? Is providing that your values are consistent with the values of the company and the CEO, there's nothing wrong with having your own set of values, providing that, again, that they're consistent with the CEO. Right. An example would be a performance culture. Well, sometimes a CEO or senior leaders in an organization are far too conservative around a performance culture, far too conservative. But they're looking for their leaders to inspire to do things the right way. But there's no reason to say, well, our company doesn't really hold people accountable, or really, in the end, if you have to, terminate many people for their performance. But it doesn't mean because that's the overarching culture, that that's not the culture they're going to inspire within your team. Your team. That's an example of rule breaking. You do it in concert with your HR team, with your team as necessary, but building a performance culture within your small group or large group team, even if it's not the CEO's sort of standard way of going about it, right? It can be a form of rule breaking, right? Again, providing that it's all within, and I've done this, I've had this many times in my career where my bosses were very conservative and weren't really thinking about, borrowing from Jack Welch, for example, like I have, how you build a performance-based culture. And as long as we were all doing the right things, the ethical things, the fair things, we were going to hold people accountable. We were going to pour energy, love, joy, success into our team. But if you didn't keep your commitments, and in the end, if you didn't get your results, you probably weren't going to be here.
Right. But at the same time, Brian, and on that,
do that.
Yeah, and on that thread too, though, like if you're forcing people to try new things, break the rules. I also think at times there has to be an element of, and this goes back to a conversation that we've had as a group previously as well too. Like there has to be an acceptance of failure as well too, to try new things and iterate and be creative in that respect as well. I think that has to be an important part of the conversation, or not the entire part. And obviously you can't just do new things that end up being failures forever. But at the same time, I think that has to be part of the culture to, give the people the flexibility, the freedom to feel comfortable breaking those rules and try those new techniques.
And so, Kevin, over to you. So you have built $1 million businesses, multi-million-dollar businesses, and built multi-million-dollar practices. If you go about building a practice in whatever industry you happen to be in this case, you're in the executive search and other business. If you do things the same way, you're probably not going to be very successful. So do you have any examples of some things that you've done or have seen other people do in this industry or other people's industry where you're like, when you're approaching building a practice, selling, where you've done things differently, rule breaking even, that you might be able to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as a foundation, I agree with Vera and some of what Ken said too. As you think about rule breaking, it's you have to kind of do a calculation, right? So, any rule is kind of like a math problem, right? You have certain variables that equal a certain outcome, right? Do these things so that this happens, or do these things so that this doesn't happen. So in order to kind of figure out what rules are worth breaking and which rules aren't, you need to do some mental calculations on playing a scenario out in your head first and seeing what the worst case outcome is, the best case outcome, etc. And so when I was younger in my career, I tended to break the rule and then do the calculation post haste. And then as I got older, I started realizing you got to do the calculation first. But I will give you an example. So I was at a firm called Diversa Partners that's known as of being a very sales-driven firm. Great bunch of folks, but they were all kind of saying similar things to customers. And I joined Riviera Partners, which was in the competitive space, and I wanted to figure out what can I do differently, and how do I differentiate. Riviera Partners had built out a software platform for managing their process, and they told me not to show anybody, but I went on my first pitch and I did a demo for a VP of engineering search, and I figured, okay, it's VP engineering. They want to know that I'm somewhat technical and know what I'm talking about. Took the prospective client through a walkthrough of the platform and won the search. And that was actually 2 weeks before my start date at the firm. They sent me in on a pitch, so it worked. And then we started doing more of that, and it was effective. Since I came to N2, one of the things that I thought about is traditionally I've always focused on my network and leveraging my existing network to generate opportunities, business opportunities, and revenue, new partnerships. When I got here, and now that I'm focusing a lot of my time on outbound, partnership kind of development, I decided to focus on people I've never spoken to before, and in large groups. Folks that like, hey, I would like to know the person at this firm for this reason, this firm for that reason, and went against the grain of a culture in search. I think in general is to just leverage your network rather than doing cold outreach and building brand new relationships. And that's what I had done historically, and I kind of broke that pattern. And in the last 10 weeks, I've spoken to almost 60, venture capitalists focused on different industries. I'd say 50 of the 60 were names I had never even seen before, but reached out to. And again, this is, these are, you get the point.
Yep. So there's Dr. Jackson has a comment here in that leaders have to build the habit and build the courage. And I'll give you an example. I love to hire interns, and when I was the chief commercial officer, I built an internship program from scratch, and I would always take on an intern who would work directly with me. I had an intern once. Her name was Sarah. She's from the South, 4.0 from University of Florida, really smart young woman. And I can see her walking around the office. She's as smart as everyone else. Most people are making things up as they go along anyway, because business is about creativity. And I was trying to inspire Sarah. This was about a good 10 years ago, to earn her place at the table and know that she belongs, even though she's a college senior. So I remember taking her aside. She was walking around. She's from the South, saying, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, being really, really polite. I took her aside one day and I said, Sarah, be respectful always, but not too polite. And since then, I've told very senior executives, anyone I talked to, because that resonated and it changed. So there is this, as Dr. J just pointed out, you have to build that habit of courage. And she also just made a comment. You also have to, if you know breaking a rule is right, even if it gets you fired, break that rule. I want to talk about financial literacy in a second and how to prepare yourself to make sure you're in a position to always be respectful always, but not too polite. But I'll just react to
Brian. Can I ask you a question there real quick? Because I feel like that's a tough one to me, because that's very much, and I don't mean anything about like for Dr. J or anybody who thinks that, because I generally agree as well too. But on the flip side of it, that may be from a very senior position, somebody who is established in their career, has plenty of opportunities outside of the current role too. How do you think of that? Maybe for a listener, as someone who's led 3 organizations, as a 3-time CEO, you think of that like, yes, someone with that mindset may have that mindset at certain levels within the organization, but at the same time, how would you guide somebody maybe at more that middle stage of their career, like that's a tough pill to swallow, to like break a rule at the expense of being fired, even if you think it's the right thing. Like not everybody can just walk out of a job one day and walk into the next one and not have an interruption in their life. I'd love to get your thoughts on that a little further.
Thanks for that question, Ken. I have, been fortunate to hire thousands of top performing salespeople and other kinds of people. And when I say be respectful always, but not too polite, I never say, hey, go out and be stupid.
Right.
If you have to ask the question, should my boss know about this? You already know the answer.
Yeah.
Most of the time, bosses are pretty good. Most of the time. And they want you to be creative. They want you to do what you said from the outset, Ken, is, I don't know why you're asking me. I've given you a small budget if you're new. If you're a product manager and you're 26 or 27 years old, I've given you that small budget because I expect you to be creative and get me a 10 times return from that budget. You don't have to ask me how to do it. Most bosses are good about those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But don't be stupid, but be respectful always and not too polite. What I also tell people is I hope for people to do is, in order to be confident and build a habit of courage, and very few people do this, as evidenced by $1.7 trillion in credit card debt, $1.6 trillion in counting in student loan debt, is most people, even in business and corporate America, that are seemingly having good jobs, some of my doctor friends, are financially illiterate. They do not prepare themselves. If you are working paycheck to paycheck, even if you're making 100, 200, 300,000, 400,000 a year or more, government takes half, etc. And you have significant student loan debt. That's a personal choice and responsibility. So what's my point? If you encumber yourself with all these things like debt, it can be harder to be even more effective with your boss, right? If you're always living paycheck to paycheck. It's a longer conversation, but you have to build this life where you can be confident at work, but not stupid. Now, back to the point about up-and-comers. In order to become a player, a comer, you have to take chances.
Yeah.
Don't be stupid. Be respectful always, but not too polite. But you have to take some shots. Kevin?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, it's also, I think, Ken, an exercise in, covering one's butt, right? So meaning if you're not in a position where you can take crazy risk and break a rule and end up without a job, but there's a better way to do something, it's how do you convince your manager to let you try something, right? How do you get your behavior endorsed before you actually do it, so that if you do try and fail, it's a slap on the wrist. It's not cutting your hand off. Sort of thing.
I think that's really smart. If you have to ask the question, should I take the extra 2 or 3 or 4 steps in selling my boss on something? Then you probably know the answer. And I often say to people, you're a good salesperson. And we're all good salespeople. Whether someone is in a sales role or not, sell your boss on the issue. But don't avoid it just because it's too hard. And certainly don't be stupid. But then human beings have good instincts. If you know this is a queen maker or king maker idea, and you've considered all the risks, and it's not ethically wrong because we would never do that or anything like that, sometimes you just do it to get noticed. But it's a judgment call. Ken, I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, and no, everything you're saying, Brian, makes perfect sense. I think this is just a healthy conversation to be having. I fully agree kind of with what you and Kevin are saying on this topic. I just wanted to make sure we were touching on that because I think it was a great comment from Dr. Jacqueline and everybody, but I just wanted to have that conversation and recognize that, not everybody has that ability or affordability. And I think too, I coming out of business school, one of my favorite professors that I had at business school, very successful, worked his way up through one of the top major consulting firms in his whole career, and is back teaching at a business school. And he one advice he'd give to everybody at the end of the semester. And I took a couple classes with him, so I got the advice a couple times. So he continued to say it is like, early in your career, as soon as you can, yes, with the debt and everything you just talked about, Brian, and he's recommending that, or at least acknowledging that, but also save some money, put some FU money to the side. And so he didn't say FU, but I'll say FU for now. So
everything you want, breaking a rule.
So have some walk away money, have some money to the side to walk away from an organization or something that you're not happy with, you don't enjoy, or doesn't allow you to take those risks, or you took a risk and it didn't work out. So whatever that runway is for you and your family or whatever it may be, maybe it's a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month runway or something. As soon as you can, put that money aside, to then have that ability and flexibility within their career, recognizing that not everybody has the ability to make enough money to put money aside as well too. So, but just something on top of that subject.
And then there's also personal choice about that. For example, I recognize that college and universities are expensive, and many people won't be out of their debt until their 40s. But you have to make a decision. Early days, perhaps you want to stay at home with your parents for 5 years. It's not pleasant, but you made the decision. You made the choice to go out of state and spend $100,000 on your education. So then there's going to be some pain with that. You can't have everything all at once. You'll have to excuse my dogs in the background. They're great protectors of the family. Really mean driver out there.
Hey, Brian.
Back to, if I may, Kevin, I get calls all the time. And because I love, and I think people should be really generous, as Oprah would say, and just about everything I've ever learned about leadership in life comes from Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil. Anyway, but be generous and pay it forward. So this woman called me yesterday. She's a top performer at a terrific company. And she said, Brian, I was on a call the other day and I have a question for you. I said, what's that? Because I'm in sales. I love sales. And I'm chairman's club, which is their big deal. I said, okay, that's terrific. We just had a conversation with our head of human resources across the whole organization. She inspired me. I loved her. I really think I want to move to HR at some point. What do I do? I said, well, first, nothing preventing you from sending a wonderful note to the head of HR and saying, you inspired me. Can I have some time? And I guarantee you, with 1,000 reps in your organization, you're the only salesperson, because you have a record now, who reached out to her and said, you inspired me. Can we talk about talent and HR? Then what you might want to do next is you might want to do an internship with her next summer. Now, having said that, that's the conversation you have with your boss first before you request that. But reaching out to your head of HR and telling her how inspired you are and you want to learn more about talent and leadership, you're only 27, 20 years old, you don't have to have permission from anyone to do that. Asking for an internship next summer when you have a big territory you're leading, that's a larger question, but you should have that in your back pocket too. Those are the kinds of things. It's not really rule breaking, but you're 27, $1 billion company, you got the head of HR. Do you need permission to reach out to her and say, can I have some time? Very few people do that. I don't know if that's a form of rule breaking, but that's just called learning and being smart. But very few people take that shot. That's
right.
what I'm about.
Right, and it's interesting because talking about career transitions, actually I wanted to ask a question to three of you, because it happens that, again, like coming back to the environment, that certain environments, they are extremely regulated, especially, for example, in certain European countries. So very often here in France and in Europe, we get approached by candidates that have developed excellent careers following, I would say, kind of an implicit rule that exists in a society. Now you go to a great school, you specialize, you focus on a specific function, specific industry, you grow, you assume progressively leadership positions, and then you end up as a top C-level or executive or CEO. And then at some point of time, you would like to do a career transition. Can be a career transition to a different function, can be a career transition to a different industry. And due to the fact that the society rule is really about focusing on specialists, focusing on developing very narrow competencies to be the best in your job, it's really, really hard for them to do this transition. And many, for example, they go to emerging markets, they go to the US because maybe those economies are a little bit more open and flexible in this respect. So what would be the advice you would give to such kind of a European candidate that is struggling to find, not even to break a rule, but really to do this career transition, to break the rule which positions him quite well in this society, but the cost is obviously personal growth and personal well-being. What would be your advice how to approach this situation?
Sure. Do you want me to go ahead and take that, Ken? Do you want to try that?
Yeah, I mean, I can touch on it real quick. I mean, I've done this very recently, Vera, because I think the first thing I would say is if you're going to do a career transition, kind of go from an entirely different sector, a different industry, I think there has to be a level of humility in your approach, right? You have to be willing to go from maybe a more senior position, more senior leadership management position to a different role. in a different industry. You have to maybe, in a sense, take a step back from overall P&L management, leadership management, and those things. Because you have to learn the foundation. So you may go from leading a team to being more of what some people refer to as an individual contributor to kind of, you know, get the foundation. And I've done that recently, going from the military into the private sector. I then worked in city government, working as an advisor to the mayor of Boston. So I was leading teams upwards of 50 plus people in the military in, you know, pretty different, in different environments, in training and on deployments overseas, to then being an individual contributor working in working for the mayor of Boston. And I even did that here, jumping from the public sector to the private sector, coming into N2 Growth. I was new to executive search. I needed to learn the industry, learn how N2 Growth operated and worked. So I came in at a, you know, as an individual contributor working for another senior director, and I was able to learn the industry, learn a lot very quickly, and then, you know, things start happening for you if you show up and perform as well too. So like taking that step back, showing a little humility, and then, you know, taking opportunities when they present themselves in your new role or new sector. That's how I've approached it, having done some of this very recently. And Brian, I'll pass it over to you.
In addition to what Kenneth said, is when people make a transition, whether it's from another country or to another land within the same industry, or they're jumping industry, or as Ken pointed out, making the leap from the military, whether you're what's called a senior non-commissioned officer, which is a senior sergeant, back to civilian life, or a senior officer, I give everyone the same advice, and that is this: know your value. Most people undervalue the skills and things they've learned, whether it's in the military, if you're a former colonel, or whatever industry that you're in. There are more similarities between industries than there are differences. Especially for leaders, it's about, can you attract great talent? If you're going to go for a leadership job, and do you have a record for that? And do you love it? Are you passionate about it? Are you building? Do you have a culture? So the similarities are about talent and culture, building it, adapting. So there are more similarities than differences. In learning industries, it's not that hard. We love to overemphasize how hard it is to learn new industries and how unique our industries and how nuanced they are. And there's often truth in that. So if you have the mindset that you really understand your value in the marketplace, and most people do not, right? I love to counsel former senior officers because they just don't understand. If you ran all of logistics and transportation for the entire Afghani theater, do you understand what your value in the marketplace? And they're often thinking about jobs that are much more lower level than what they're actually qualified for. So I would say first advice is understand your value and prepare for an exit long before you decide to make that move. Meaning, shape your skills, shape your record, do more content kind of stuff. Be out there in the public melee, if you will, so that when people Google you, your profile comes up and you're doing live streams, or you're on Twitter, or you're on LinkedIn. So if you're going to make that transition, let people know who you are. And there are more tools today to do that than there ever have been. And most people don't do that either.
Absolutely.
And Brian, your point on knowing your value is it's such an interesting one. And I would, double click on that by suggesting that, somebody in that situation look at kind of core competencies, right, to recognize where their value is. Because we talked about this a couple weeks ago about fit and skill set versus, competency fit versus experience fit. But what you'll find is there are more similarities than you think, because the competencies are the same. It's just that the content and the domain is different. So if you have these problem solving skills and these analytical skills, if you have these sales skills, selling to, this type of buyer, hey, guess what? The sales process is actually pretty similar, even though it's a different type of company and different type of, buyer, right? Therein lies the value that you might not realize you have.
Agreed.
Right. Thank you. Brilliant.
Very good. And then a lot of breaking rules is about creativity. And I'm not talking about creativity around shirking rules. There are ideas all around us from different industries, different verticals, television, movies, people we work with that are working for another company, that if you just apply them to your own company, it may seem as a rule break or something different. And I'll give you an example. I had a friend many years ago worked at a company called Career Builder. And you were all familiar with Shark Tank, right? And I had heard that the Career Builder CEO would have this competition, wasn't called Shark Tank, and just had a competition, and people competed in teams, and the winning team got funding on the spot for like $50,000. We got executive sponsorship. Seemed like a pretty good idea. And I remember my friend, her name is Beth, telling me about that. Then when I became president of company McGraw-Hill, and then Shark Tank was on the air, and I just said, you know what? Let's borrow that concept. We're going to have a Shark Tank. I'm going to borrow my concept from a friend of mine who used to work at Career Builder. And we're going to have our own internal Shark Tank, and the winning team gets funded on the spot in executive partnership. That's a form of rule breaking, a form of it, right? You're doing interesting, creative things, and you don't know. People would say to me, "Why? How are you doing that? Are there copyright protection?" No, not copyrighted because I'm not making money from Shark Tank. But my point is, if an idea comes to your brain, go out and do it, because rule breaking is also about creativity. And it's not about being creative about how you break rules. It's about bringing creativity to your organization. You don't always have to ask for permission for that. Any other thoughts? Any things that you've seen on shows, experienced teams you've been on where people have creatively brought creativity into the organization that may be considered rule breaking?
Well, just one recommendation on that front is I think everybody should have a whiteboard, in their office, because I'm not a I'm not a software engineer, but I've found over time that when I've tried to solve a problem by breaking a rule, if I can, and an idea comes to mind and I flush it out on a whiteboard, it's amazing how much further you'll end up taking an idea than just like, oh, something fleetingly popped to mind. But that's not worth investing time in. You end up surprising yourself that, like, wow, I might really actually have something here. And when you're limited, to just your computer, you don't tend to open up a note file. Microsoft Word doesn't really, inspire a ton of creativity, right? You might not want to have to do it on, PowerPoint, but give yourself a physical forum to create and break rules and solve problems.
Great. Anything else on breaking rules, or why people don't break rules more often, or things you've seen that can inspire other people doing it to do it more?
Right. I'm just thinking again about the boundary, because I think that, like, again, it's a perception, but for many people, and including myself, when we speak about breaking rules, automatically you think about certain risk which is at stake, or maybe doing something which can potentially bring some harm to an organization, which is not the case. So I'm thinking, where's the fine line between what is called breaking rules and what is called just expanding industry boundaries? Because obviously, even Growth, even in our practice, we constantly innovate. We think about new tools. We think about diversifying our value proposition to be more strategic and I mean, for me, it's not about breaking rules, because rules themselves, they exist, again, in a very implicit way in the industry. But here it's just about talking how to diversify your value proposition and how to adapt it to the market. So in a way, for many, it would be okay. So they are just breaking industry boundaries because they're offering services which are not related to HR, but it's just the question of looking at it in a very holistic and a very integrated way. So where's this line between breaking rules and
I love this notion of
entering blue ocean?
Of a notion of boundaries, and how do you know how far is too far? And I'll give you a very specific example. I was a new president of a higher education company, McGraw-Hill. It was very much a Basel textbook company. And I found this guy. His name is Brian Bellardi, true name. He was in one of the PR guys. And I created this bond of trust with him that if I was saying or doing stupid things, he would tell me. So my first 2 or 3 months in the job, I was about to go on some TechCrunch or some radio show. And he stopped me because he could see I was getting all excited about doing something he thought was crazy at that time. And he was right. And he said, listen, BK, I know you want to say the textbooks are dead. They're dinosaurs. They're broken. You want to do that. But if you do that right now, you will be fired the next day. You understand? I'm a PR guy. I know this because we don't have a different solution right now. First, do what you said, build that personalized learning agenda and all these things that you want to do, but skirt around that issue is my advice to you today. So in terms of boundaries, make sure that you surround yourself with people who are going to give it to you straight. Now, whether you're an up-and-comer and you're testing your ideas, you're 25, 26, trying to make a name for yourself and wherever you're going, make sure you have a brother, sister, colleague who's going to give it to you real straight. Okay? And so, but test the boundaries, but you got to build this network of consigliaries, if you will. We're going to tell you when you're doing something really stupid. And timing, someone once said to me, Henry Hirschberg used to run a company called Pearson. He said, Brian, timing is everything. So testing boundaries is often about timing as well. You can get real excited about breaking a rule, but don't be. But it goes back to this earlier notion of don't be stupid, right? Yeah. So, any other comments or thoughts before we close for the day? Well, listen, I love this book. Sometimes things that have come out years and years ago are as relevant today. So if you haven't had a chance to read this book, First Break All the Rules, it's fantastic. And we've all seen movies and shows that stay with us for a moment and sometimes they stay with us for months and sometimes years. That book for me has stayed with me my entire life. So let's go out there, be smart, be respectful, always but not too polite, but let's absolutely break some rules and move our own company forward, but also our fellow human beings forward. So every Wednesday at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Into Growth has live streams across our entire company. We are currently, our team that we represent, the program called Jump. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for listening with us, sharing some time with us.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.